Good morning. I'm walking up the high street in Stony Stratford. It's Sunday and we're heading towards Queen Eleanor's garden. Behind me you can see the Queen Eleanor garden in Stony Stratford, and behind that you can hear the traffic on Queen Eleanor Street, the bypass that goes around Stony Stratford. In Galley Hill there's a school that was formerly called the Queen Eleanor Primary School. If you go to Hardingstone in Northampton, you'll find the Queen Eleanor pub and Queen Eleanor Road. In this video, we're going to find out who Queen Eleanor was and why she's so important to Hardingstone and Stony Stratford.
Tucked away in a side street in Stony Stratford is a giant mural of Queen Eleanor. Perhaps nowadays better known as the inspiration behind the famous Eleanor crosses, she was the wife of Edward I and lived from 1241 to 1290. Dying whilst on a trip north to meet her husband, the king was so bereft he ordered monuments to her memory built everywhere her body rested as they made their way back to London. Written in a banner at the top of the mural over Eleanor's head is, "Whom living we dearly cherish, and whom dead we cannot cease to love." This quote was taken from one of Edward I's letters, written in January 1291. Eleanor of Castile, just a child of 13, married 15-year-old Edward of Westminster in 1254, a marriage of convenience to affirm English sovereignty over Gascony. Eleanor returned to her family following the marriage, whilst Edward continued his education, earning his spurs at tournaments and fighting in wars. Eleanor grew into a beautiful young woman and Edward grew tall, earning the nickname Longshanks and later Hammer of the Scots. When they met again, probably when Eleanor was about 18 years old, it is said that they fell in love, even though their marriage had been a political arrangement rather than a romantic one. They had 16 children, although not all survived into adulthood. They became inseparable, and unusually Eleanor accompanied the king on crusades to the Holy Lands. It was on such a crusade that Edward was wounded in the arm by a poisoned knife. The story being that Eleanor herself sucked out the poison from the wound, thus saving his life, although it is much more likely that a surgeon saved Edward by excising the deceased's flesh. They were away on crusade in 1272 when Edward's father, King Henry III, died and Edward became King of England. Edward and Eleanor were finally crowned on return from the Crusades in 1274. They reigned for many years and were renowned for being close and much in love. In 1290, the king was in Scotland awaiting Eleanor's arrival on an important trip, when she was taken ill on the journey to meet him. She was diagnosed as suffering from a slow fever. The Queen was taken to the nearby manor house of Richard de Weston at Harby near Lincoln. The King, on hearing the news, travelled to be with her. Eleanor failed to respond to treatments and died on the 28th of November 1290, aged 49, with Edward at her side. The Queen's body was first taken to Lincoln for embalming at St. Catherine's Priory. The viscera were buried in a tomb in Lincoln Cathedral, a place she was said to have had fond memories for, and her heart was buried at Blackfriars Church in London, at her request, as was the custom of those times. Her body was taken to Westminster for burial. The journey took many days, and many people were involved in the solemn task of moving her coffin through the country on its journey to London. King Edward later declared that to honour Eleanor, a memorial would be erected wherever the Queen's body had rested on its journey home to Westminster. Crosses of this nature were erected in the hope that pilgrims and those passing by would pray for the soul of the Queen and so hasten her journey from purgatory into paradise. During these times, people were often paid to pray regularly for the soul of important people to speed their journey. Edward probably chose this method of memorial, having seen similar crosses erected in France and other parts of Europe on his travels. The resting places for the Queen's coffin, and therefore sites for memorial crosses, were Lincoln, Grantham, Stamford, Geddington, Hardingstone, Stony Stratford, Woburn, Dunstable, St Albans, Waltham, Cheapside, West Cheap, and Charing Cross. Finally, the coffin would have arrived at Westminster Abbey for burial in a tomb she probably ordered before her death. Only 3 of the original crosses now remain at Geddington, Hardingstone, and Waltham. These will have been cleaned and possibly repaired over the centuries.
In everlasting memory of conjugal love, the Honourable Assembly of Judges of the County of Northampton resolved to restore this monument to Queen Eleanor when it had nearly fallen down by reason of age in that most auspicious year, 1713, in which Anne, the glory of mighty Britain, the most powerful avenger of the oppressed, the arbitress of peace and war, after Germany had been set free, Belgium made secure in her defences, the French overcoming more than 10 battles by her own and by the arms of her allies, made an end of conquering and restored peace to Europe after she had given it freedom. Now that inscription is a translation of the Latin that is on this stone.
The monument, now known as Charing Cross in London, in front of the Charing Cross railway station, was built in 1865 to publicise the railway hotel at Charing Station. The original Charing Cross was at the top of Whitehall on the south side of Trafalgar Square. It was destroyed in 1647 by Puritans and later replaced with a statue of Charles I. Edward I outlived Queen Eleanor by 17 years and did in fact marry again. He finally died of dysentery near Carlisle in July 1307, aged 68. The Eleanor Cross in Stony Stratford stood at the lower end of the town towards the River Ouse on Watling Way, which is now the High Street. The exact location of the cross remains something of a mystery. The cross itself was destroyed during the Civil War by the parliamentarians, like many of the other crosses and memorials. A commemorative plaque on the wall of 157 High Street is all that is now visible. This cross at Hardingstone, south of Northampton, stands on what was likely the grounds of the Delapré Abbey, where the coffin may have rested overnight. Like the other remaining crosses, it has been restored multiple times, including during the reign of Queen Anne in 1713. The monuments are noted for their complexity, statues and carvings. The most intact is at Geddington, while the Waltham Cross has been heavily restored, with Eleanor's statues from there now housed in the Victoria and Albert Museum. There was much controversy during her life regarding her property acquisitions through forced sale of bonds on debt arrears. According to some historians, the crosses and tomb were a propaganda coup, rehabilitating Eleanor's image, and the romanticism of her death and the crosses is still resounding in street, garden and building names to this day.